I'll run this story straight out of my imagination. No sketches. I'll leave it to your imagination. The story is about tea. In modern times, we use tea bags, but tea bags haven't always been around. I don't know when they arrived on the scene. Maybe it was the 70s, maybe it was the 60s, I don't know. But they've been around all my life, tea bags. But I did hear older people when I was young talking about methods of making a pot of tea. You'd put in 1 spoonful of tea from a tea caddy, and then there'd be 1 for the pot, 1 for each cup and 1 for the pot, and you would somehow heat the teapot up beforehand so that you weren't pouring boiling water straight into it, and you would put in tea, and then you'd have a strainer, I think, so when you were pouring the tea out, you didn't want to get the tea leaves in your cup, so you poured the tea out through a strainer, and this made an authentic cup of tea. And tea bags were convenient, but not they weren't seen to be as good or as authentic as a proper homely pot of tea. So the character in this story is old-fashioned, and he's straight-laced, and he's heading for retirement, but it's really early retirement. And we'll set the time in the mid to the late 70s. And this gives me an opportunity to examine the attitudes of the time. So John and his wife Mary are old-fashioned people, almost the type of people who would be talking about things just after the war, even though they weren't taking part in it. They would have heard their parents talk about it, World War II, and so they had a type of old-fashioned style about them, and they were early 50s in their age, but in the mid to late 70s that would seem to be nothing short of ancient. If someone was 25 years old, in those days they were considered to be getting on a bit. So someone of their ilk, their age, would be seen to be put out to pasture, of no use to anyone. And John was not a dynamic person. He was steady, reliable, not particularly highly educated. In fact, something which he's always managed to keep to himself over the years is he never learned to write. cannot even write his name, but he managed to get by over the years working in his job, which didn't require that type of skill, writing or reading. He was a simple man and didn't have big ideas about anything, just plodded along, and his wife was much the same. So they got into a stage where it was all getting a bit too much for John, and his wife suggested that perhaps he should just throw in the towel, retire at his age, and have a quiet life where he wouldn't have any responsibility, he wouldn't have to turn up for work and that type of thing. John was thinking it could be an idea, but he didn't really know what to do with himself. How would he spend his time if he wasn't working? So he thought, well, my retirement and pension won't be a great deal, so what are we going to do? Well, they had a kind of small inheritance that they got, nothing too dramatic, maybe £10,000, and they had the property which they lived in, an old style flat. So there was nothing. They had simple lives, didn't drive a car, no other commitments. So they thought, okay, maybe we could do it then. So John took the plunge and he retired. Officially got his small golden handshake and a very moderate pension. And that was him, out of the workforce, sitting about in the house, reading newspapers, watching a bit of the TV in the evening, living the high life. But really, it was the quiet life. One of the things that John did like was a nice cup of tea. That's something he relished. But the pace of life, as they were heading into the late 70s, into the 1980, it just seemed too futuristic. 1980. And John was thinking, yeah, this is all very well, but I mean, I would just rather have a cup of tea. So John and his rather dowdy, straight-laced wife would go out of an afternoon, wander around town, and there'd be people, young people with punk hairstyles, Mohican hairstyles, and being quite brash, and people with safety pins through their nose and stuff. This always, he would notice this, John, and he thought this was all highly irregular, and so he would look for a quiet tea shop where he could maybe order a pot of tea and maybe a couple of scones. So on a Tuesday and a Thursday afternoon, John and Mary would visit the local tea shops and try and have a relaxing pot of tea and a scone. But it wasn't happening, wasn't to be, because things were getting a bit too pacey, too brash. People were drinking coffee and offering all sorts of different things that he didn't care for. All he wanted was to sit in the corner with a pot of tea, and he wasn't too happy with the tea that was being served up to him. He didn't think it was of the quality which he richly deserved. And he'd try different coffee shops, but they were all, not coffee shops, tea shops, but they were all cafes, but they were all getting too bustly and modern and not quaint. So he would harp on to his missus about this. It was a bugbear. He said, "You just cannot, for the life of me, get a decent cup of tea these days. I mean, this is what it's all about now. You can't even get a cup of tea, a pot of proper tea." So this went on for some considerable time, and his wife Mary was getting to the end of her tether about John constantly whinging about the quality of tea in cafes. And she said, "Well, why don't you open up your own tea shop if you think you can do better? And you know I am good at making up cakes and scones. I've always been good at that. So perhaps we could open up a tea shop and I'll make the cakes and scones and you can be the master of the tea. And we may get tea jennies come in who are connoisseurs." And he says, "Well, how are we going to fund that?" And she says, "Well, I've been looking at a small premises which is vacant, and I've had made initial inquiries, and I think we maybe should have a go, make it an adventure. Come on, John, for once in your life, take a risk. Put your money where your mouth is." He says, "But we could lose our money, and then that would be it. What would we do in our retirement?" She said, "Well, we aren't doing very much anyway, so let's just seriously think about it." So they do. They put their money down for the lease, and they open up a very small tea shop with just a few tables and put out a few leaflets and postcards and things into newsagents' windows. He goes around on a bicycle and pays 6 pence a week, and considered to be a campaign to put postcards in the windows of newsagents to advertise his tea shop. And initially, just one or two people float in, vagrants and stuff, float into the shop, and it doesn't look like much is happening. The scones and the cakes are going stale. It doesn't seem like anybody cares for old-fashioned service. This is the thing that bothered John, that young people just didn't have any courtesy. They didn't know how to talk to people, relate to them. They just bunged down the cup and off they went to serve the next customer. So his idea was to make the shop a lot more homely and a sociable type of place. And with amazing effort by Mary and his fantastic ability to make a grand pot of tea, remarkably, it started to catch on. The tea shop started to get busy. Not only that, they had to even bring in and hire some young staff, and he would train them in how to serve people and talk to them and show them what old-fashioned service was all about. And this quaintness, an old-fashioned idea, started to become essentially the brand, the selling point. And after 6 months, they got so busy. They were always working flat out. They had to actually move premises to a place 3 times the size, with 3 times the amount of tables. And by this time they had a very strong brand all based around a nice homely pot of tea and scones. And sure enough, on the momentum and the wave of appreciation from the first tea shop, their bigger premises took off, and they were, before long, they were going at full capacity. And but John wasn't a businessman, and Mary didn't know much other than making scones and talking pleasantly to people, so that they had to bring in accountants and the like to advise them what to do next. And so much for the quiet retirement. John was a humble man. He had no idea how to talk to all these people, so he just pretty much left them to it. And it took perhaps another couple of years. And after a couple of years, John and Mary had 6 separate tea rooms, and they were becoming quite well off in terms of their personal income, all based on this quaint idea that they had. So much so, they were starting to get offers from buying groups and national chains if they wanted to perhaps go national right across the country with their quaint brand of tea shops. Maybe 100 tea rooms or more around the whole country. And John could never think like this. He's not a man who could understand or grasp this type of thing. And he was saying he was advised that he could franchise his branch out, and he would get a cut from all the franchises. Everybody would be doing and running their own personal tea shop at somewhere location in the country based on the brand of his small tea shop, which was very successful, and it would be franchised out and he would be the franchisee, or the franchisor. And this was, I think, too much for John and Mary, having been thinking it should have been a quiet retirement. And they thought this might be just passing the time. It turned into, he's turning into something which was becoming proper business. And then one day he got an offer, a letter and a telephone call from the USA, and they said they were seriously interested in the tea branded shop, the tea rooms, and they would like to meet up with John with a view to expanding into America. And they were saying initially perhaps 400 tea rooms, but this could be expanded. So we're willing to do what it takes. So what we'll do is we'll get our negotiators over. So these guys came over in an airplane and met up with John and described their plans for expansion into the United States. And John couldn't understand any of this, but his wife Mary said, "You got to take it. You've earned it. You got to take the offer, whatever it is. They might offer us." She said they might offer us £50,000, and we could buy a cottage in the country and then properly retire. He says £50,000, that's come on. That's a lot of money, but that's an idea I like. So the American negotiators came over for the corporate, and they arranged a meeting, and John and Mary were there, feeling a bit out of place because these were the executive types with some slick talking. So they were talking a lot of patter about turnovers and franchises and rules and regulations, which was all going over the heads of John and Mary. And then the chief negotiator made a stab. He put down the offer, wrote it down, and said, "Look, we want to buy into this, so here's our offer." And he put it down, his offer, on the table. He says, "That's what we're offering you, and take it or leave it. We're not wanting to play hardball here. That's it." So Tom was looking at it but getting very nervous about this. Sorry, John was looking at it, getting very nervous, and he was getting very unsettled, particularly when we were pushing him to take the offer. He said, "We're going to go back to the States tomorrow. We're not mucking around. So, do you want this offer?" And John was getting very uncomfortable. And he said, "Well, I'd like to speak to my wife in private, so to discuss your offer." So he went over to the side, and the executives had a confab themselves, and they were muttering away. And then what happened was the corporate people decided that they couldn't bear to miss out, so they thought, he's playing hardball, this guy John, that's why he's so successful, so we're going to have to, it looks like, double our offer. You see the way he looked at that offer, he completely dismissed it. He's a good, shrewd businessman, and he's playing hardball. So we want to get back with this in the can. So we're going to have to double it, and that's it. Kill it or cure it, blow it. So we're going to have to go. So they come back over and they meet up at the table again, with John looking very uncomfortable. And the offer for the rights to franchise has been written down, and it was £2 million. And the negotiator says, "Okay, John, this is crunch time. We're talking Turkey. That's our offer. You just have to sign there. And that's it. We're done deal." And John says, "I can't read. And I can't write. So therefore, the reason why I was hesitant is because I didn't know how to tell you that I couldn't sign my own name."